Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
No one can say that the reporting of information that he leaked to us is trafficking in stolen goods. This is called reporting. It's what we do.
He's called it Washington's war on the media. Hi, I'm Marsha Franklin. Coming up next on Dialogue, I talk with Washington Post media reporter Paul Farhi about how the Obama administration's crackdown on leaks has affected journalists and their sources. We also talk about the massive changes in the journalism industry, including at Farhi's own paper. Dialogue is next. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marsha Franklin. In 2005, Idaho native Mark Felt admitted to being Deep Throat. The former associate director of the FBI was the main source for Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein's Pulitzer Prize-winning series on the Nixon administration's break-in of the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel. While some Nixon loyalists had suspected Felt, there was no hard proof, and for years he had denied ever passing information to Woodward or Bernstein. Now, today, the government would have a much easier time tracking down the source of leaks like Felt. That's because all of us are leaving digital trails, whether they be phone calls or emails. And documents leaked by Edward Snowden have shown that the government is monitoring many of those communications. My guest today has seen how the increased scrutiny by the government has affected reporters and their sources, especially in Washington, D.C. Paul Farhi is a media reporter for the Washington Post, where he's worked for 25 years. He was in Moscow, Idaho earlier this year as the keynote speaker for the Oppenheimer Ethics Symposium at the University of Idaho's School of Journalism and Mass Media. Well, thank you very much for doing this and welcome to Idaho.
Thanks so much. Nice to be here.
It's perhaps appropriate that you are talking about national security issues here in Idaho because, of course, Deep Throat, Mark Felt, is from Idaho, and former Senator Frank Church was the progenitor of what's now known as the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and the courts that go along with that are intimately involved in this whole issue.
Right. I just learned that Mark Felt, who is near and dear to the hearts of the Washington Post, is a University of Idaho graduate, and I have to say, local boy made good.
Well, things are quite different these days in terms of confidential sources and the ability of the government to track them down, ferret them out, and that's what we're going to talk about. You could have chosen a lot of topics to address in your speech at the University of Idaho. Why did you choose this one, the so-called war on the press?
Well, Washington is one of the few cities in America in which the press actually reports not just for the local community, but for the nation and for the world. What happens in Washington is of interest everywhere. What happens with the press in Washington, I assume, is of interest elsewhere. And what's happening with the press in Washington is a very interesting story about democracy.
Well, let's explicate this a bit. What do you mean by a war on the press? What's happening in the vortex of Washington that has made this rise to that level?
Well, I should say at the start that war is a bit of an extreme metaphor here. It's not exactly a war, but it is a climate that is much more difficult in the last 5 years, I would say, or at least in the last 13 years since 9/11 than it has ever been before. There is suspicion, there is hostility, there is a relationship that has gotten very sour in many cases. And I kind of break it down, and at the risk of oversimplification, I break it down into two parts. There is the extracurricular practice, the day in and day out relationship between the news media and the White House and the way in which they interact. And then as a separate part, there is the legal climate, the prosecution of national security leaks, classified information that has gone on, which is a much more slow-moving but perhaps even more important part of understanding the relationship with the press. The legal climate has been essentially a crackdown on leaks that might inform the public and might help the public understand what the government is doing. Now, people probably are most familiar with the big headlines about Edward Snowden and Bradley Chelsea Manning and WikiLeaks, but there have been a series of other prosecutions involving press leaks that have created this very climate of suspicion that I'm talking about.
Well, let's delve into that further. Obviously, the government has tapped into reporters' phone lines, records, emails. How is this influencing the way, first of all, reporters do their jobs?
Well, I would say, first of all, it has shocked us, and I think in some quarters it has outraged us. There have been formal complaints about this. What you're referring to are two cases which came to light in the last year and a half or so. One involved the Associated Press, and one involved Fox News Channel and its reporter James Rosen. And in both those cases, the reporters had revealed information based on classified information that created the impetus for a very aggressive kind of investigation to ferret out the leaks of the information. We understand that. That's kind of the way it works. But in this case, the investigations were of a kind that we had not seen before. In the Associated Press case, the Department of Justice secretly subpoenaed the records, the phone records of about 100 Associated Press reporters to find their contacts in order to identify the source of the Associated Press story, which was about the CIA foiling a plot in Yemen to bomb an airline. Now, the number of people involved in producing the story for the Associated Press, there were about 5 reporters and editors, yet the Department of Justice, unbeknownst to the Associated Press, went on a fishing expedition collecting the records, the phone records, going back for months at 3 bureaus of the Associated Press in order to find out who was talking to whom and who might have been the source of this information. In the James Rosen case, unbeknownst again to the reporter and his news organization, the Department of Justice subpoenaed secretly the phone and email records of the reporter who reported a story about a classified information in which it was revealed that North Korea, the United States knew that North Korea was about to conduct a nuclear test of its armaments. In both cases, it was the breadth of the investigation and the secrecy of those two investigations that surprised and shocked us. There was no consultation, there was no agreement, as there has been before, about the scope of the search, and it wasn't only until the indictments were revealed that either of the news organizations had any idea that any of this was going on. So, there is a sense that you're not only, the government is intruding into the private communications of the news media, but is in effect attempting to criminalize the activities of reporters who are reporting. It is certainly the government's right to protect its classified material. That's just national security. But the receipt of that information is also part of our job, and to weigh it as to whether or not it's valuable information worth the public's interest. And in both cases, I think both of these stories were in the public interest, and we simply did our jobs. So the real question here is what kind of tactics can a government prosecution of this kind take on? And I think there was a sense that they had gone too far.
Relating to reporters, how does this affect somebody like yourself or Barton Gellman, who's reported on the PRISM story, the spying on average Americans? Are reporters having to encrypt their phones? Are they having to watch their emails more carefully? Going back to Mark Felt, Woodward and Bernstein could set up a meeting with him in a garage. There was no email. There were phone calls, obviously, but could do that relatively easily. Now meeting with sources is a bit more difficult.
Yes, well, let me say I am not a national security reporter. I write about the press, so I'm not the kind of person who anybody needs to steal emails from. But I do work with national security reporters. They're quite good, and the work they do is, again, of enormous public interest. And if you ask them, and I have, they will tell you that there's a certain kind of climate of paranoia that goes on, knowing that records can be secretly seized and subpoenaed. There is a much more of a feeling that you'd better protect your sources. So in a lot of cases, they will speak to intermediaries. Please ask source A the following questions, and then source A talks to the intermediary who talks to the reporter. This is a way to protect the source so that he can honestly say in polygraph tests that he did not speak directly to a reporter, and that would be the case. This is a protection for the source. We don't want our sources to be harassed, exposed, certainly even prosecuted for doing what helps us do our jobs. But again, it's made it more difficult for us to do our jobs, and it's made it more difficult for the public to know what the government is doing in the public's name. The debate in the Snowden case is whether he's a traitor revealing the secrets of his country, or he's a whistleblower. And he started a great debate over what's whistleblowing and what's subversion. And from the perspective of someone in the press, and I would think someone in the public, you could make a very strong case that he has helped us understand the extent of what the government is doing in secret, which no court has approved and has never been revealed or voted on by the American public. So,
well, there's also a conversation and a debate about the reporters themselves and whether they are, in fact, breaking laws and being criminals by passing along stolen information.
Yes, that was almost amusing if it wasn't so scary. At a hearing on Capitol Hill last month, the House Intelligence Committee, the chairman, Mike Rogers, suggested that the reporters who are reporting Snowden's information could they possibly be prosecuted for trafficking in stolen goods. Now, it is clear that Snowden, is up. He would be prosecuted if he were here under the Espionage Act, but no one can say that the reporting of information that he leaked to us is trafficking in stolen goods. This is called reporting. It's what we do, and we do it not because we're here to sell newspapers, although that's one thing we're trying to do, but because we're trying to inform the American public about what the government is doing, and doing in secret, and doing in a way that might not necessarily be constitutional. So to suggest that we are trafficking in stolen goods by writing about leaked classified information is a case and a stretch that no one has really made before, but I think is emblematic of the kind of climate we're in now, in which the activities of reporters are being called into question as criminal behavior.
Well, it's interesting. We don't have time to go into it, but there has been conversation about whether a federal media shield law is needed so that a judge is actually making these decisions about whether reporters' records can be not only subpoenaed but looked into surreptitiously. This is a changing media field, and to wrap up this section, the Obama administration had said it was going to be the most transparent in history when it came into office. I'm hearing from reporters, including Michael Kirk, who's a producer for Frontline, who's from Idaho, that this is in fact the most lockdown administration in its dealings with reporters, not only what we've just discussed, their surveilling of reporters and their sources, but also in, as you mentioned earlier, the day-to-day operations between the White House and reporters, lack of access.
Yes, and I'm glad you made that assertion, because it spared me of having to make the assertion about this being one of the most locked down administrations. I think there is a widespread feeling in Washington that it is exactly as you characterize it, and has been the most since the Nixon administration, ironically, talking from the perspective of the Washington Post. But yes, the day-to-day climate has its own dynamic, and part of this is the White House, and every White House wants to control the message. We understand that, and it's our job to get more of the message. But we're now in a different technological age. The White House has a number of social media platforms it can use to bypass us entirely. It can go on blogs, it can go on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. There are a number of ways to get its message out that bypass us. We're no longer have to be the medium through which information passes. And the White House knows that. And they've used that very effectively. Now, I will say that if I were in the White House, I'd probably do the same thing. But, it brings up a question as to what role the independent media plays in informing the public. If you simply wanted the government to speak to you directly without any filter, without any context, you would have a dictatorship. And again, I'm not suggesting that this is a dictatorship that we're looking at, but the technique of leaking information or presenting information directly is a one-sided way of doing business. And from the perspective of the media, we feel that we should have greater access in order to be able to report independently on what the White House, what the government is doing.
I found it fascinating, for instance, that one of your articles went into great detail about how few newspaper interviews President Obama has given, preferring instead to use broadcast media, or as you said, bypass the media altogether. That's so interesting, such an interesting change from when I grew up, when you grew up, where they first turned to the big papers.
Yes, in his defense, President Obama has given more interviews to the news media, or to the media, let's just put it that way, than his predecessors. And I think there are numbers on this. But you have to look at the kind of interviews that he has done. It's Entertainment Tonight and The View and Jay Leno and the morning news team in Albuquerque. These are very strategic kind of interviews that are designed to sell a specific program in a specific area, and to place him in a context in which the level of, shall we say, hostility is not high. It's a friendly environment for him. And that, the people who regularly cover the president, who are most invested in the day-to-day coverage of the White House, we feel like we have a special role to play in advancing the story about, rather complicated policy issues. And one of the ways you do that is to speak directly to the chief executive himself. And when we are cut out of having access to him, it makes our stories and our understanding of the news that much weaker. The Washington Post has not had an interview with President Obama since 2009. And the interview we had in 2009 was for about 10 minutes. So the New York Times has had a little bit better luck. I think the Wall Street Journal recently had an interview, but it's very sparing, and it makes us feel a little bit like he is avoiding us and finding a friendlier context, an environment in which he can sell his message in a more one-sided fashion. And again, I think the public is the loser in that, because being closer to the issues, following them day to day, we can ask the tougher question and bring a much deeper understanding of those issues to the public.
Well, we're rapidly running out of time. It goes so quickly. I did want to ask you about your profession in general. The article I just mentioned is an example of your work as a media reporter. How long have you been concentrating on media itself? And it seems as if this is now a business story as much as anything else, what with mergers and acquisitions and how are newspapers going to survive. It's not just the old, style section, if you will, in the Washington Post of what is this reporter doing and, what are they covering. It's a hard news story in many instances.
It truly is, and it's a great point to bring up. I've been a business reporter, I've been a political reporter, and now I am covering the media. I've been around in covering the media and communications businesses for quite a long time now. But you're absolutely right. The news business is a business, and it is a business that is in quite a bit of distress. And you can't understand the news business or the news media without understanding those economic foundations. The internet has changed everything, as everyone knows, and it has created certain pressures on the news media that didn't exist before. Our audiences are fragmenting, our advertising base is eroding. We're all in a little bit of trouble, and each news outlet has its own sob story to tell. So it has created a constant reevaluation of what we do and how we do it. And the really scary part is that no one really has an answer. No one's really figured out what the business model is going to be. No one has figured out what's going to support independent journalism going into the future. And that scares a lot of us. And just on a personal level, we'd like to continue working in a business that we love. We just don't know how we're going to do it.
Sometimes on a personal level, you, meaning the larger you and your compatriots at the Post, are the actual subject of a news story that you are writing. In this case, the sale of the Post company, the Washington Post, I should say, held by the Graham family for 8 decades to Jeff Bezos of Amazon.com. That must have been quite an assignment to get, and again, an Idaho tie, because Bezos and Graham, I believe, talked at the Allen and Company conference in Sun Valley, Idaho.
That's right. Boy, everything kind of comes back around to Idaho. I didn't realize how much my life is centered here.
I try.
Yes, that was one of the most thrilling and exciting stories I've covered. I was informed by my editor about 4 or 5 days before the sale was announced that it was going to be announced. And I, of course, like everybody else in our newsroom, was utterly shocked by hearing this news. Then, of course, I had to keep the secret up until the time we published the story. It was through a bit of tears that we did that story, because we love the Graham family. They've been very good to us and to the Washington Post and to the readers of the Washington Post for a very long time. And, going back to the question about the news business, this is Exhibit A about how the business has changed. The Graham family would hold on to the Washington Post forever if they could, but the Washington Post is in the same boat that everybody else is. It has to find a new model. The Grahams felt that they did not have what it was going to take to bring the Washington Post into that future, and they found somebody that they felt would be the best steward for it. And we are confident, hopeful that they are right. And I don't think anybody knows better than them, what to do with the Washington Post. But so far the signs have been very positive. We are, we're in a new age, and we're really quite happy with our new boss. I hope he's watching so that he knows that we're quite happy with him.
Well, as we conclude here, and you're going to be talking to students, among others, when you're at the University of Idaho, journalism students. First of all, what concerns you most about our profession right now?
Well, I not to be too draconian about it, but I worry about having a profession. I realize that there is always going to be a demand for news and information. People want to know what's going on. That's human nature. But what form it takes is unknown. Newspapers are in a lot of difficulty these days. And again, as I said earlier, I'm not sure anyone has figured out the internet to the extent that you can make a viable business out of it. You can certainly make a money-losing business out of it, and many people are doing that right this moment. But you know, if I were a young person coming up, you hear two things. Oh, it's a terrible business out there. It's a terrible market out there. And you also hear this is the most exciting time to be a young journalist because there's also a lot of opportunity. If you have skills, if you have you know, digital background, which every young person does these days, you can do pretty well. And there's lots of activity. There's lots of ferment. Someone's going to get this right. We know, and you know, we'll be fine. But you know, in the meantime, there's tremendous disruption. I've gone through, my newspaper's gone through 5 buyouts of reporters. We don't know what our economic future is, and it causes us a lot of anxiety.
Would you still encourage a young person to go into journalism?
I absolutely would. I've had what I think is a great life in this profession. I've met people like I'm doing today that I would never have met. I've done things that I would never have done. It's been exciting, and it's been everything I've wanted to do since I was a kid and loved newspapers. And you know what? As a young person, you can try and fail. You can always get back up. If you're smart, if you're aggressive, if you have something on the ball, you're going to be fine. It's just there's a lot of unknowns, and that if you can handle the uncertainty, you're going to do great. And a lot of people can't, and you know, it makes it easier for the people who can.
Well, there's always stories to tell out there, and so there will always be a need for people to do that. I thank you for your time, sharing your time to talk about the state of the journalism profession now. And good luck to you as you continue along this very changeable path.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You've been listening to Washington Post reporter Paul Farhi, the keynote speaker at the Oppenheimer Ethics Symposium at the University of Idaho. For more information on the symposium, as well as an interesting web extra tape with Mr. Farhi about changes in the journalism profession, check out the Dialogue website. Just go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue. For Dialogue, I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for tuning in.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. Check out our website, become a friend on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter.